Welcome to Cattle Connect, your insight into Alabama's beef cattle industry. I'm your host, Erin Beasley, and this is Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Well, producers, welcome back to the Cattle Connect podcast, where we talk all things cattle industry and the association. This week's episode brings in a guest, and he's a friend of the ACA and probably a voice that you will recognize if you've ever listened to the Land Show on radio. Jonathan Goode is an accredited land consultant. He's host of the Land Show and has been a land broker for the last 17 years. And I'll just add, Jonathan, in general, I've just always enjoyed being around this guy. He's a great guy to be around and somebody that I would say fits in the category of a person positively impacting the people around him. So, Jonathan, I'm thrilled that you would come on the Cattle Connect podcast, and we want to welcome you into the studio this morning.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words and for having me into this studio. What a fantastic setup you guys have.
Thank you. We are very proud of our new setup here.
Well, every time you come in or your staff comes in to do the Land Show, we don't have anything nearly this fancy to offer you. So thank you for having me in today.
For sure. We're happy to do it. And we've got some good content to go over today. You're the land man. That's what I'm going to call you.
One of them, yes, yes. I mean, we eat, sleep, and breathe land. Have been doing this for 17 years. And so anytime someone asks me to talk about it, I'm happy to do that.
Well, you've always been really nice to us, letting us come on the Land Show and, talk about the association, talk about some of our initiatives, some of the things that we've done. So I feel like this is a little bit of a way for me to maybe pay you back for all that free advertising over the years.
Well, I will tell you that I am a volunteer for the Cattlemen's Association. I volunteer to go judge food whenever y'all need somebody to go judge a steak. Or a few years ago, I got to come to the Junior Cattlemen's cook-off there. Yeah. And wow, just so much good food there. So I volunteer whenever y'all need me.
We'll take it. We like our volunteers, especially our judges of the good food. So.
That's right.
Well, as always, we want to start maybe with a little background for those that don't know you, Jonathan. So tell our listeners, who you are, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, I come from North Alabama. I'm married into Perry County, Alabama, and I've been there for 20 years. My wife and I and 3 kids, we live on a little farm, a little 70-acre farm there in Perry County. And I've been in the land brokerage business for 17 years, have been involved with the Land Show for 9 years, and really just every week try to talk to people about buying and selling land. I believe it's a great investment. It's one of the great pathways to wealth generation and preservation for American families. And so it's something we believe in. And I really, especially since COVID, and we'll talk more how COVID has changed the land market in a few minutes, but it's just something that so many more people have really sought to make a part of their personal lives, is just owning some small acreage or large acreage and just having a place to be out in nature or to farm or to homestead or whatever it is they want to do. So land is an essential part of Alabama for certain, and it's part of our American heritage.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one thing we know about land, God's not making any more of it.
Right.
We've got what we've got. And it's certainly a huge part of the association for the simple fact we can't raise cattle in this country without land. Right. So very important to us. And, it probably would be good for us and for our listeners today. Our conversation is going to be around, maybe you're a younger producer, or maybe you're somebody that's looking to make a land deal. You're here on the horizon or looking to make that first land deal. So we're going to kind of jump into some of those topics, but we probably need to go back in time just a little bit, Jonathan, because I know from just personal experience, okay, we own land, we have a farm, we're in Macon County.
Okay.
We're in a county that is not known for a lot of growth.
Right.
We're not in a county that is seeing just a ton of people move into it, or just, it's not close to a big city in any way. Closest one would be kind of that Montgomery or Auburn area. But what we've seen is these land prices have gotten they have jumped.
Yeah.
And I know that we see that across the country and certainly across the state. So maybe you can give us a little bit of background about maybe how we got to where we are today, where, we're dealing with these interest rates. We're dealing with these land prices that are higher than they were a decade ago by a good bit. So maybe give our audience a little insight.
Yeah. So when I started in the land business in 2007, it was not uncommon to find open ground for $1,500 to $2,000 an acre. I mean, you could find it in a lot of different places. That market crash in 07, 08 really held people off buying for a while. Over time, the market started climbing. And for many years, $2,000 to $2,500 an acre for pasture ground in a lot of the state was reasonable. Mm-hmm. When COVID hit, everything became unreasonable. So apparently, when the government prints $8 trillion and hands it out, people start to spend it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that people wanted to buy was land. And so just like everybody experienced with the housing market, the land market really went insane. It's not uncommon to see pasture ground prices in the $3,500 to $4,000 an acre range, which for a producer doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's not feasible.
Yeah, I mean, so you're not paying for that with what you're running on the farm. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's not quite as bad as the $25,000 an acre cropland that they're seeing in the Midwest, but still, you're looking at land prices that are not justified by the commodity that's produced on them. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, we have seen several places, recently that have sold in the $3,500 to $4,000 an acre range for open ground. Mm-hmm. And it's just hard especially if we're talking to young producers, it's just hard to help them understand how that makes sense.
Yeah, I know that, we see that a lot, and it's a discussion we have a lot as you're familiar with our Young Cattlemen's Leadership Program. We have a lot of discussions about, getting into the industry, having that capital availability to be able to, whether it's purchase land, lease land, put in fence, buy the cattle, do all these things that we want to do to be, raising cattle in the way that we want to. And, the initial land purchase can really be, that's a really big bite to take if it's not something that's in your family already.
Sure. Well, it is. And so many people that I deal with have off-farm income. The farm is the added benefit. They work their job off the farm. They do the farming. But what they really want to own is the land. Mm-hmm. And so they have to do the combination of all the other things that go into that to make that a possibility. And so that's, that's very common that there will probably be one or two off-farm incomes and then, or whatever happens on the farm as well, just in order to be able to pay that note on land.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and we'll talk about who loans on land and, what people can expect when they go to talk to a land lender, and maybe some strategies for your listeners if they're trying to make a land purchase in a non-traditional route also.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I told you I'd get off script because I always do. But you mentioned, why people want, they purchase land and, a lot of times they have the off the farm income, one or two incomes or whatnot. But what is the benefit of owning land? Just, in your opinion, what is that benefit?
Well, there are a lot of them. I see my benefits running around in my yard, playing in our creeks. Yeah. My kids have grown up living out on land. My closest neighbor is a half mile one direction and 3.5 miles the next direction. And so we're just out in the middle of nowhere. We enjoy that peace and quiet. I guess we don't play well with others, so maybe that's why that works for us. But there's the added benefit of I've told people that if a man's home is his castle, his land is his kingdom, and you can really do what you like out there. It's always one of my favorite things to go to a property and see how people have cast their vision onto that particular piece of land to make the improvements that they themselves enjoy and their family. And it's just, one of the very first things that God created was land, and the very first job he gave man was to tend it. And it's just cool to be able to have that connection all the way back to where we come from.
Oh, I love that. I love your answer to that, and couldn't agree more on those little guys running around outside. Yeah. There's nothing like it. So, well, good deal. Well, let's get into some of the meat of what we want to talk about today. And we mentioned before, we probably have a lot of people out there that are maybe looking at making a purchase, or maybe they never have. Maybe it's been a while.
Yeah.
and obviously things change with technology. And also maybe this would be a little bit of a loaded question, but is there maybe a basic checklist that you like to use as a land consultant and kind of the landman that's helping a lot of people?
Yeah. So the first questions I'm going to ask somebody when we go through this, and your audience is tailored more toward cattle production, so that's probably going to be a main driver for a lot of your folks. But I always ask them what they want to do with the property, just so they have a clear understanding that they can articulate the desire for their property, because that's going to weed out some potential properties that they might look at. Also going to ask them, is there a particular area that they want to be located in? Have they established a budget? And then, ultimately, why do they want to own the land? So it doesn't matter why their parents want to own it, or, why I want to own it. Why do they want to own it, so that they can figure out how they're going to use it and develop it. So once we have those things in place, then it's just a matter of trying to narrow down the possibilities that are in that area, and showing them places that might fit their checklist.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Would you say, if you've got a person or a family that comes to you and they really are kind of looking in that cattle sector, are there certain things within that list that kind of narrow down, and what would be those things that you would then maybe try to tease through with them? So
it would be important to understand if they're going to try to locate next to an existing family operation, like if this is an expansion or if this is a new operation entirely. And if it's a new operation entirely and location doesn't matter, you may be able to find better ground or less expensive ground in a different part of the state. Mm-hmm. So because if somebody had farm ground in Lee County and they wanted to add to it, well, that's a whole different ball game than Macon County or Bullitt County or Barber. So a lot of the same principles are important, but somebody who's going to buy farm ground in Lee County may be able to buy a third or half as much for the same money that they could get in some of these other surrounding counties. Okay.
Yep, we definitely see that around more of our rural counties versus some of those that are closer to the bigger cities, where we are seeing a lot of expansion from the urban area into the rural footprint.
It's amazing to me what those prices in the eastern half of the state are doing. Around Huntsville and around Auburn. And there's some other pockets in Shelby County and Baldwin County, but those areas are just astonishing land prices. It's really crazy to see.
I hear you. I see him as well. So, and inundation of people too. I might add, from out of state. A lot of people wanting to move to Alabama is kind of what I keep hearing and seeing in the statistics.
Well, it's great. We, like that old joke goes, we come to Alabama, but leave your politics at the door, and just come on in. So
absolutely. Just on a personal level, I mean, have you seen an increase in your business with out-of-state people versus more in-state?
Yeah. Yes. But so I'm mostly focusing on larger acreage stuff. Mm-hmm. I just sold a 180-acre farm to some folks from West Virginia 2 weeks ago. They have family in Alabama and in Atlanta, and so they wanted to have a place closer. So I mean, the number of reasons why people buy land here is, innumerable, but it's just we are seeing more and more folks from out of state coming into the area.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good deal. Well, I know that there's been a lot that has changed. You mentioned COVID, 5 years ago now, and, certainly from the time when you got in the land business 17 years ago to today, there's got to be a lot of changes that have happened. So does anything kind of jump out to you that you'd share that's really changed and, for a person that is trying to get a land deal done?
Absolutely. The biggest one, every one of your listeners has an app on their phone now called Hunt Maps or OnX or Land Glide, which essentially you can drive down the road, look at your maps, see who the landowners are, click on that button, get that landowner's phone number. When I started out, as recently as 2007, which that doesn't sound that long ago, but everything was paper maps.
Yeah.
And you didn't have any of that technology. So now everybody, if they ride down the road and see a farm that they like or see a property that they would be interested in, that information is at your fingertips. You can screenshot it to a land professional or whomever and just say, hey, I'm interested in this farm. Is there any way that we could buy it? And I mean, that is, as simple as that sounds, that is a major game changer in the world, to be able to have instantaneously. I mean, I can remember just all the prep work that went into hours of preparing to go show a property, because you can find it on paper, but can you find it on the actual ground when you're supposed to get there? And so, and Google Maps was barely a brand new thing. And anyway, all this technology has really changed how the land buying process works. So, and I know this is going to sound crazy to your listeners, but Alabama has one of the most robust land markets in the country. I would say we're probably the top 7 or 8, like behind Texas and Colorado, some of those other places. Our markets are not as high, but the number of volume of transactions that happen in Alabama for rural land exceeds well over half the other states in the country.
It's got to be pushed by recreation, correct?
That's a big driver. Yeah. I mean, we obviously don't ranch as much as some of these other places, but so Alabama has a land owning ethos. Like, it's just in our blood. Everybody's grandmother or great grandmother owned a piece of land, and our family dream is to get back to what they had. Now, they were poor as dirt and saved their bread wrappers in the drawer and all that kind of stuff, but we all love going to Mama's house and seeing that stuff, and everybody wants to have their own piece of that nostalgia and own it. And that's just part of who we are in Alabama.
Well, it helps too. We've got those nice low property taxes in Alabama. That doesn't hurt anything, does it?
No. I mean,
that's one of our big sellers of an association membership.
I always tell folks we're in the top 2 lowest property taxes in the country. Between us and Louisiana is my understanding that we fight over who's the lowest property taxes. So.
Hey, I'll stay in that ranking any day of the week. So
no doubt.
My name is Brad Jones, and I'm the owner of Bluff Creek Cattle Company in Wiggins, Mississippi. Beef quality assurance means being proactive instead of reactive. It's looking ahead for the things we can do to make life easier for our animals. And one way that we care for animals that people outside the industry might not know about is it's a 24-hour-a-day job. Feet on the ground, boots in the mud. We are family farming at its core.
To find out more, visit beefitswhatsfordinner.com.
Let's just say that you're working with a young couple. They've found that piece of land. They're interested. It's for sale. They're using you, and they're ready to go ahead and make an offer. In terms of down payments, I know it's very, very different when you're talking about land transactions versus maybe like buying a house.
Right.
And so, what's your general recommendation in terms of like, boy, I really want to put something down on this land before I go and, as I go and put that offer in?
So there are 3 main land lenders in Alabama: Alabama Ag Credit, First South Farm Credit, and Alabama Farm Credit. They're in North Alabama. So those are
all
the
good friends of ours.
Yeah, and mine too. They sponsor the land show, so just full disclosure. But they're the 3 main land lenders, and then Alabama One Credit Union or whoever your credit union is or whatever. So they all finance land. They typically, depending on the situation, require 15 to 20% down payment. Now, I know a couple of them have the option that if you own some acreage, free and clear, that you can pledge that in lieu of a down payment. So if your family has a 40-acre tract off somewhere that's not real strategic to them and they would let you use that as collateral, you can use that in lieu of having to come out of pocket for the 15 or 20% down. So that is one option. The USDA and the NRCS offices have some first-time farming loans, and they have some disadvantaged farm loans that if you're a minority or a female, or if you're a first-time farmer, I've been doing this 17 years. I've successfully completed 2 of them, so I know that they can be done. But they have had programs with 0% down for 40 years with 4% interest.
Goodness.
So like I say, I don't do many of those. It takes a really long time. It takes 90 to 120 days pretty much standard to do those. But from the time, so if you went the more traditional route with Ag Credit or First South, 30 to 45 days, you're going to be closing on that piece of property. And some of them have programs. If it's under $250,000, they don't require an appraisal. You're not going to buy a ton of farm ground for under $250,000, but there are. But if you're just starting out, everybody's, and that's one thing I've learned. So it doesn't matter to me. Everybody's idea of what is big. If you've never lived on any land, I mean, 5 acres feels like a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Or 20 acres. If you've only lived on 5 acres, 20 acres feels like a lot.
It's a big jump.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, and there becomes a point where at some point in your life, if you just keep adding, you're going to have more than you can tend to. I mean, that's just, and that's what I hear from everybody. It's just more than I can keep up with. So, so I mean, it's all relative.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and those are really good recommendations on all those various ways that you can go out and, finding collateral is important. We've even been told that there's some other routes that you can take with a lot of our lending institutions that's not even related to land that you can use as collateral if you're already in the cattle sector. So we've got some options there, and of course that's important. But you would say kind of that 15 to 20% is.
I think that's pretty standard. So and I'll tell listeners how I bought my farm. So the farm that we live on has been in my wife's aunt's family for 100 years. Nobody in their side of the family wanted to live there. So we asked, would they sell it to us? Well, they didn't want to sell it outright. Mm-hmm. They wanted to owner finance it to us so that they would have a predictable monthly stream of income. So her uncle and I shook hands on a deal. We didn't write anything down on paper. We agreed on a number and the day we would close.
Oh, you're brave.
And I mean, I trusted him completely. He trusted me. I would not recommend that to anybody else. But I mean, he and I did a deal, and that was good for them. And there are a lot of older farmers or older landowners, if they don't have relatives that want to come back to the farm, they'd be willing to give a young farmer a shot. So that would be something to think about, especially maybe if the older farmer, the male, is in poor health and he has a wife. This is a way to set up a stream of income for her. Ongoing. It's a retirement fund.
Yeah.
And so it has worked well since that time. Whitney's uncle passed away, and this has been a retirement stream for his wife. That's exactly what he set this up to do. And so,
do you feel like you're getting more calls or do you ever get calls from older producers because we have this conversation a lot around the idea of, obviously land preservation and, there's definitely a want to out there. And we hear from people that say, if I don't have anybody to give it to, but I sure don't want it to turn into houses or whatever. So do you feel like you're getting more calls like that?
I would say not currently.
Okay.
But I do believe going forward we are, just as you read the statistics about farmers aging out. I mean, what about the age class of our farmers across the country? Mm-hmm. And I don't have those statistics in front of me, but the average age of a farmer increases every year, and it's like 65 or older now. And so as fewer and fewer farmers can afford to come into the business, there are going to be more farms selling over time.
Right.
And to be frank, selling good pasture ground will bring more money going to something other than a cattle farmer. And I'm not saying that's right or that's wrong. I'm just saying the reality is that's why so many of the housing developments that we see in Alabama, you'll see some old milk silos in the background. They were all old dairy farms.
Yeah.
And so when you drive by, I mean, all these, multi-housing projects were built on old dairy farms because the terrain's gentle and the farmers were getting out. I mean, there are bound to be fewer than 50 dairy farms in the whole state now. I mean, there aren't.
There's less than 20.
Okay. Well, it can't be that many. So,
yeah.
All those things transitioned, and it's just I'm all for, I tell people all the time, if you can figure out how to keep the farm in your family and that's what you want to do, then you don't need to get me involved. But I help people. And so 95% of the time I represent sellers in the transaction. A lot of times I suggest buyers and sellers don't come to the closing together because over half the time, my sellers shed tears at the closing table. Something bad has generally happened for them to have to sell the farm. Somebody's passed away, there's a divorce or debt or something. It's almost always the buyer's happiest day of their life. They've worked their whole life to get to that point. So you've got somebody who's at one end of the emotional spectrum, and then the buyer is at the complete opposite end of the emotional spectrum. And so it's just it's a really sad case sometimes when you see people having to sell, but they need to do it. And so there are challenges that come with that. Yeah,
that's interesting perspective for sure. Well, you've done a lot of land transactions over the years. You've been involved in a lot of this. Are there any particular stumbling blocks that you feel like are really good for maybe first-time buyers or those that are new to this conversation to hear and know the facts and the truth on?
Yeah, I would say start having a conversation with your lender early to make sure you understand the costs associated with the purchase, because there's the down payment and then there are going to be closing costs associated, and if you have to have a survey, and there are just things that can pile up. And so you don't want to spend all of your money on just the down payment and not have the ability to meet your closing costs and those sorts of things. And I generally encourage people, don't over leverage yourself to where you're not going to be able to eat or make your payments and those sorts of things, because a bank will have no problem taking it back, and it'll do a lot of damage to you potentially. So I would say, and farmers a lot of times are risk takers. They like to roll the dice, and and most of the cattlemen that I know, or at least when I was involved with more dairy, the solution to all life's problems was just to add a few more cattle. So, if the market was low, just they needed a few more cattle. And if, times were good, let's add a few more cattle. And, medium market, let's just put a few more out there just to see.
I'd say that general thinking is still very relevant.
So I think it's just, I would just say, don't get yourself over leveraged. And you don't have to have the newest, nicest equipment and those sorts of things. And it's okay to ask for help. Just really, one thing I have found, and I think you and I have talked about this on the land show, is just farmers are a big neighborhood community. All across the state. Everybody shares the same struggles, the same values for the most part. And so they're willing to help each other.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. A little plug for the association, but great reason to be involved with our association, because it does provide that network, whether it be at the county level or up at the state level.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Big part of it. Well, I know you don't have a crystal ball, and anytime somebody says, "Well, Erin, what's going to happen with the cattle market?" I always say, "Well, I don't talk about the cattle market because I can't predict it, and I'm not an ag economist." But I know you don't have your crystal ball. But what do you think is going to kind of happen with this land deal? We've been going up, 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 up. Where do you feel like we're headed with the way the inflation and interest rates are doing right now?
To be honest, again, I don't have a crystal ball, and if I did, I wouldn't be here. I'd be buying up all the land. But it's
that's right.
I honestly feel like it's not going to back off a whole lot because so much of this land was paid for with cash.
Yeah.
And so it's not heavily leveraged. And so I think that the land market is going to stay. There may be some small fluctuations, 5%, maybe 10%. But it ever correcting, I'm not going to say ever correcting, but correcting something really bad is going to happen in order for land prices to drop. And we have seen that the government is willing to bail out the public in order to prevent catastrophic financial failure. And so I think that now if something comes along that the government can't wiggle its way out of, that would be it. But I don't see anything that I'm aware of that is going to make it back up right now.
Yeah, it almost feels like we could have the potential where, land kind of stays with what it's doing, even if like the housing market has a, I don't know if crash is really the right word with the way the economy looks, but, even if the housing market tanks a little bit, the land thing is going to, land's a great investment. We know that.
Yeah. it has utility, and that's the thing. I mean, that's, there'll always be a need for land because it's under everything. Everything else is built on top of it. And so, if there's open ground, and to be honest, I mean, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I don't know that it'll be as big a deal under President Trump, but in 4 more years, it might be. People talk about putting solar panels on properties, and I feel certain some of your
it's a
listeners,
trigger phrase for me. So
yeah, I know. But here's what I'm saying. But if you're a landowner, if you're a struggling farmer, and somebody comes to you and says, if you'll give me a 5-year option on your property for $50 an acre, and if we ever do it, if we ever put solar panels here, you'll get $900 an acre per year for 30 years. And so you're essentially somebody, and I've been dealing with cases like this in West Alabama. Somebody essentially offers you $27,000 an acre for your land that you could get $2,500 an acre for, and you get to keep the land. It's hard for those folks to say no to that. I mean, even though I don't necessarily, it's happening a lot in Georgia. Mm-hmm. There are a handful of solar projects in Alabama, but it's just the economics of, if a landowner can get that, and they were going to get out anyway, I think it's hard for them to turn that down. I mean, you have to be really committed to your values to do that. And I don't fault anybody. So I look at land as so many families, people have acquired land, improved land for the whole purpose of being an investment for their family. Depending on the family size, eventually there will be enough heirs where everybody won't be able to agree on what to do with that property, mm-hmm. and it'll need to be divided up. So 2/3 of my business is estate transition. So when it gets down to the next number of people that don't want to be in land ownership together, or none mm-hmm. of them are coming back or whatever. So 2/3 of my business is working through that. And it's hard because there's always one person that wants to keep it. There's always one person that wants to fire sell it and get what they can. And then there's the one person in the middle that's trying to, do whatever.
Play monkey in the middle.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's just a tough thing. But I look at land as it's meant to be a blessing. If you're buying it as an investment for your family, whether it's the next generation or 4 generations down the line, it was done to be a blessing. And I think America has totally been sucked into this, like the Yellowstone TV show was so popular, and it brought up a lot of land related issues. Sure. I mean, it had a lot of drama around it, a whole lot of unbelievable drama, but the backdrop was on land and how to preserve it for your family. And right. I think a lot of people, that was the part that intrigued me about it, was just, what's the land component and how America really has a connection to land.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it definitely, aside from all the drama, all of those shows that Taylor Sheraton has produced, they all have those.
You should get him on the podcast.
I don't know if we've quite made it there yet. Maybe one day. But
Cattle Connect.
But they, they definitely have those underlying tones, and those topics are brought up. And most of the time I'm just sitting there, kind of shaking my head like, that's what we talk about all the time. So
school nights mean more than homework, books, and study. It's a moment when families gather and learn, especially about each other. And nothing sets the table for sharing like beef. Easy to prepare and easy to save for later, beef can help nourish a family growing together. Together, we bring more. Beef. It's what's for dinner. Funded by beef farmers and ranchers.
Well, we've talked a lot about, your relationship with a person or a couple when they're looking to buy, but let's kind of flip it before we wrap up and talk about the people you work with that are actually trying to sell. Okay. So, any recommendations on maybe a checklist if I'm getting ready? I've got to list it for whatever reason. Right. And I've got, my pasture land, it's fenced. For whatever reason, we've got to move in a different direction. So what's your approach look like with that person?
Yeah, so the way generally it works is somebody is getting to the stage that it can be a very long time between the thought of selling initially and when you actually decide to put the property on the market. So I would say talk to a land broker or 2 or 3 and get various opinions of what the value would be and get somebody to provide you a marketing proposal of what your property would realistically bring in this market. Get them to show you what they would do to market your property. Hopefully they're going to ask you questions about what you want to do with your proceeds. If you have if you've owned the property for a long time, there's a good chance you're going to have capital gains taxes that are going to be significant.
Right.
I'm dealing with a guy right now, I'm closing one next week, that he inherited the property 30 some odd years ago, and he asked me to give him an opinion of value from the 90s. And I'm like, sir, that's a little out of my scope of expertise. I don't know, but that's when he acquired the property, and that's when his basis was established. And so I think you want to have a team of people around you. You want to talk to your accountant, you want to talk to your estate planning attorney if you have one of those, and you want to talk to a land broker, because capital gains taxes can be significant. If you've always thought, hey, I'd like to own a condo at the beach, or I'd like to own a rental house for my spouse to have a stream of income, when you get ready to sell that cattle farm, you can do what's called a 1031 like-kind exchange, which allows you to sell any property that's held for investment and to purchase another property that's held for investment. So like-kind does not mean pasture for pasture. Like-kind means any property that's held for investment into another property held for investment. And that will allow you to defer your capital gains. If people tell you that that you won't have any capital gains, then they don't understand the 1031 process. But essentially, it can be a good tool to help you mitigate your taxable gains from the sale. And if you don't have heirs to pass the property down to, or if you need to sell it for whatever reason, take part of the money and then exchange the rest of it. But I would want to hear from you what's important to you with the sale of the property, what you plan to do after it. Because if you sell it and you get clipped for taxes and you say, man, I didn't realize that was going to happen, then I haven't done a good service to you. And so it's really like everything in life. It's not how much you make, it's how much you get to keep. And that's, figuring that out.
You bring up some really good points related to the tax advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it. But I know a lot of those, 1031 exchange, we talk a lot about step up in basis. There's a lot of those tax provisions that we're able to take advantage of as, landowners, as agricultural producers, that really, really important. We talk a lot about the death tax when we're talking about, when someone does pass. So I'm glad you brought that up, just for the simple fact, so our listeners know, these are things that we are working on as an association to ensure they stay in place.
Yeah, for sure.
So that you have that option and you don't get taxed to death.
Yeah.
No pun intended. But.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for farmers, and I haven't looked at this in the last week or so please forgive me, but President Trump has been a huge proponent of conservation easements in the past. One statistic I read says he has at least 18 conservation easements personally through his business entities. And there are some really strategic, if you want to keep the ground in your family and keep it as farm ground, the average person, if they put their property in a conservation easement, gets to take 50% of their adjusted gross income, and a farmer can count 100% of their adjusted gross income in their donation to conservation easement. So, and again, I haven't checked on that in the last couple of weeks, but I feel sure conservation easements are probably not going anywhere. And so, that could be a strategy for taking some tax benefit now, and keeping that farm in farm ground in perpetuity.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we're really trying to educate ourselves on more, to see what's available, what makes the most sense, what are those options available for producers, because there are a lot of people out there that we know, maybe they don't have those heirs, or maybe they do and they're a little concerned about what might happen.
Yeah.
As you said, you can get that conservation easement, and you can ensure for perpetuity that land stays in agricultural production and get a tax advantage at the same time. So it may be something to look at. I'll just plug for a second. In a couple of weeks at our convention, we're having an entire panel discussion on estate planning. And so we've got a couple of different people that are going to be speaking. We'll cover a lot of different topics, but I suspect that some of the things that you just brought up, Jonathan, they could come up as well. So as you can see, Jonathan is a great wealth of information. Really proud to have him as a friend and a colleague that we can call on and visit with on his show. And now he's come back to our podcast. But before we wrap up, I do want to just ask anything else that you would maybe want to add that we haven't covered today related to, making that land deal, and anything that you want our listeners to hear.
Did you want to discuss leases real briefly?
Well, I have to say we've gone a good bit of time.
We'll save that. We'll reserve that for next time.
I think we have another episode. Yes, we might jump into lease land at some point.
I just say thank you. Thank you to all the cattlemen and women around the state, all of our producers and growers. And I'm a fan of your work, and I eat it often. So thank you. I appreciate what all of y'all do for sure.
Good deal. Well, Jonathan, thanks again for coming on with us. Producers, hope you've enjoyed this. A little different content today, but we feel like this has been some really some good information that you can take back with you. Maybe it gives you something to think about, something to kind of crunch on this afternoon. But join us next week. We'll come back with another episode of the Cattle Connect, and hope you have a fantastic week. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when our next episode goes live. Until next time, remember, beef, it's what's for dinner.